I've played with a lot of different musicians by this point in my life, and I was really ridiculously fortunate that the first jazz musicians that I started working with through a music and dance improvisational kind of a collective were some musicians that have risen to become very well known and respected musicians. So I was dancing as an improviser, as I mentioned, with a group of dancers, Robin Feld, Susan Kreitz, Diane Elliott, a number of different people. And Robin Feld's boyfriend was Paul McCandless, the oboe and soprano saxophone player from the group Oregon. So we had a lot of great improvisers while we were dancing. And one of the first concerts that I did with that ensemble, I brought my flute along and I just played a little bit and I started singing, and then I'd put my flute down and I'd go out and dance. So it was a really multicultural kind of a wonderful. The early '80s were a great, very expressive and dynamic time in New York City on the scene. Once I got involved with that, one of the people that was in that ensemble for those dance concerts said to me, "You got to meet this guy, Joe Lovano. He would totally dig you and you would dig him." Musically, of course, he meant. So he actually took me to Joe Lovano's loft on 23rd Street, and we played trio. This was a guitar player, also from Cleveland, which is where Joe is from. So Michael Boshin is an acoustic guitarist, and he brought me to Joe's loft, and we just played acoustically for, half an hour or something. And it was the first time that I had really focused on the sonic aspects rather than instead of moving and being a dancer. And it was very exciting. It was fabulous. And then I met and started improvising with people like Kenny Werner and Billy Drews and Ratso Harris and Tom Rainey, John Cass, a violinist. So I started working with musicians who were very open and had great ears and skills on their own. But you asked me about my attitude and how I assessed other people's attitudes towards vocalists. There are some people that just don't want to play with singers, and part of that reason is that historically a singer has been out in front of the band and utilize the soloist versus accompaniment space. And because of my experience as an ensemble dancer, I developed a sense of being an ensemble musician using my voice, which is my first instrument. So I learned that there were some people that were not going to be empathetic or supportive, and there were others that were. Fortunately, I was in New York City, and there's thousands of wonderful musicians there. So I learned who I really felt simpatico with. Kenny Werner is a brilliant improviser, and he's like my brother. He was so wonderful and supportive, and Joe and everybody. So, so I started out in the jazz community in New York City in the early '80s, singing improvised music and being part of an ensemble of musicians that were creating dynamics and shapes and chordal movement and melodic and harmonic energy, and it was very, very exciting. Because I grew up listening to Ella Fitzgerald and all the songbooks and big band and Billie Holiday from my family years, I had to go back and study the standards again and really find where I could find my interpretation of these great, memorable songs. So I was always kind of trying to find a balance between the creative improvisation and the classic compositional interpretation. The most inspiring moment is when you're playing music with people and you're listening to what they're doing and what they're contributing to the sound, and then responding and playing counterpoint to what they're playing rhythmically or harmonically or melodically, or joining in with them and creating harmonies, as I said, so that it's a unified kind of of a sense of creating the music together. And you really have to learn to develop your ear so that you can respond instantaneously like that. That's something that I'm always speaking with students and young people, because a lot of us get very hung up on the material, the words, the notes, and it's really, to me, much more important to get to the feeling of it. Now, I have spent many years improvising without words, and the concept of singing songs with lyrics and telling a story came a little later in my development. And really, Abby Lincoln and Sheila Jordan and Jay Clayton were my biggest influences, Tony Bennett. So many wonderful singers, but I had to really work to add the lyrics as another dimension to the singing the song once I started working with the standards. I started writing my own material very early in the 80s, and most of them did not have words because I was singing as a horn, and that was my conception at the time. And I really related to the lead trumpet in the big band, the high notes and the soaring phrases, because I was a high soprano. Through the years, I realized, excuse me, that telling a story, you can't tell a story all the way up here in the soprano range. You really have to be in your speaking mid-range of your voice. But you asked me, where do I find inspiration? Very often it's from other people, other musicians, as I said, but I love nature. And if I go out for a walk in nature and I see the colors in the sky and flowers, and I've become a serious gardener. I love creating gardens with palettes of different colors and different timings, so the rotation of the bloom is there's something always blooming. So nature has really always been a very important place for me to become grounded again. If I get too much up here, I get grounded again, and I guess you might see I'm one of those tree huggers. I love trees, and you know, people complain, oh, it's raining, it's terrible, and I always say, yeah, but it's good for the trees. In addition to the flora and in nature that is so beautiful and inspiring to me, I love the birds. What would the garden be without the birds flying around and hearing their different songs? And I'm a pretty good whistler, so a lot of times when a bird comes, I go, I'll mimic the sound of the birds. And traveling around the world, as I do, I hear, we were just in Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula, and the birds sound different there than the birds in New York State do. So I love the birds, and I feed them, and I put suet out for them in the winter, and yes, I do. I love the birds.